Hi, good day. My name is Billy J. Alanano, a fourth-year student of Santa Cecilia College, taking up Bachelor of Secondary Education, major in English. So this is my topic for today. It's all about German and Germany literature. And this is Germany. Germany, a federal parliamentary republic in Western Central Europe. The most populous member state in the European Union, the major economic and political power of the European continent, and a historic leader in many theoretical and technical fields. Known for its rich cultural and political history, Germany has been the home of many influential philosophers, music composers, scientists, and investors. German is the official and predominant spoken language in Germany. It is one of the 23 official languages in the European Union and one of 3 working languages of the European Commission. Next, I'm going to discuss is all about the time periods of German literature. The time periods of German literature are medieval German literature, the Baroque, the Enlightenment, Sturm and Drang, Classicism, Romanticism, Young Germany, Naturalism, Expressionism, and Dadaism. Here is the most famous of literature in Germany history, the Sturm and Drang or Storm and Stress. This is a Germany literary movement that developed during the latter half of the 18th century, most commonly characterized as having lasted from 1767 up to 1785. Next, I want to discuss about medieval German literature. German literature begins in the Carolingian period, first in Latin and then in Old High German. Hildebrandes led the most famous work in OHG, a short piece of Germanic alliterative heroic verse which is the sole survivor of what must have been a vast oral tradition. Other important works are the Evangelische Bach, Gospel Harmony, at Altfried von Weisberg, the short but splendid Ludwig's Lied. In the northern dialect of Old Saxon, a life of Christ in the style of heroic epic known as the Helian. The writer during this period are Goethe, wrote German's first major drama, Gotts von Berlichingen in 1773, and German's most sensational and representative novel, Die Leiden, des jungen Werders, The Sorrows of Young Werder in 1774. Schiller wrote the play Die Räuber and other early plays which were preludes to Romanticism. Klopstock, another writer, J.M. Arlenz, and Friedrich Müller. Next, I want to show you another video clip regarding German or Germany literature.
Germany is a country that probably doesn't need an introduction. The German nation has for centuries been at the heart of European politics and culture and has brought us some of Europe's most famous and influential figures like Beethoven, Nietzsche, Luther, Bach, Einstein and Wagner, but also more controversial individuals like the Nazis or Karl Marx. From fighting against the Romans to being the dominant nation within the Holy Roman Empire to unifying and becoming one of the main forces in both world wars, Germany has undisputably made a name for itself, whether you want to call it fame or infamy. Even now, Germany is one of the world's most prosperous nations, and although recent controversies surrounding multiculturalism, the European project and record low approval ratings of Angela Merkel seem to be driving the country apart, the Germans are still some of the wealthiest people on the planet. In this video I will cover the history of Germany from the early beginnings to the modern era. We don't know much about the early history of the Germans, or any Germanic peoples for that matter. All that we know comes from the perspective of the Romans, who, at the time, viewed the Germans as barbaric. Also to be noted is that these Germanic peoples were in no way unified. Although their languages and customs must have been related in some way, they were separate tribes, only united by a common enemy, the Romans. One such moment where different Germanic tribes united against the Roman Empire was in 9 AD, when the Cherusci, Marsi, Chatti, Bructeri, Chossi and Sicambri beat the Romans decisively at the Teutoburg forest. This resulted in the Romans halting their attempt to conquer the Germanic lands east of the Rhine River, which they refer to as Magna Germania. This created a split between the Germanic peoples west of the Rhine River and east of it. One example of this is the Germanic people west of the Rhine gradually became Christian from the reign of Constantine I onwards, whilst the Germanic people in the east remained mostly pagan until much later. In the 4th century, the Huns invaded the non-Roman part of the Germanic lands, which launched what is now known as the Migration period, where up to 750,000 people from several tribes, of which many Germanic, started invading and settling lands all over the Roman Empire. This would eventually lead to the fall of Rome in 476. One of these, the Franks, would eventually conquer most of Gaul in the west under Clovis I. Clovis was also the first Frankish leader to be baptized as a Roman Catholic, rather than a Germanic pagan. From his reign onwards, Christian missionaries would travel all over the Germanic lands, attempting to convert the still largely pagan population, while the Frankish kingdom also expanded into Burgundy and Swabia. In 768, a certain somebody called Charles became the king of the Franks, and during his reign, he greatly expanded the range of the Frankish Empire. For the first time, all West Germanic people were united within one empire. This man was called Charlemagne, or Charles the Great. This empire wouldn't last for very long though. Charlemagne's grandchildren partitioned the empire into 3 parts in 843. One of these parts, East Francia, is usually considered to be the predecessor of Germany. In 936, Otto I was crowned as King of Germany, the Kingdom of Germany being a kingdom within the Holy Roman Empire, of which he would also become emperor, along with Italy, Bohemia and Burgundy, although those weren't kingdoms yet at the time. Oh, and also all of these kingdoms were made up of tribal duchies, not to be confused with the tribal duchies of much earlier. And up in the centuries following, the Holy Roman Empire would become more and more complicated, as shown on this sped up video by Oli Bai. Yeah, I'm sorry for not animating this myself, but I think you understand why. Let's not talk about all the details of the Holy Roman Empire and its kingdoms, duchies, bishoprics, electorates and whatnot. Let's just focus on the general history of the German-speaking part of this quote-unquote empire. During the age of the Crusades, German religious orders were established, most famously of which being the Teutonic Order, which still exists to this day, although it has kind of lost its purpose after fulfilling the goal of Christianizing the Baltics. The Teutonic Knights also kickstarted the German eastward expansion, also known as Ostsiedlung. This is the name given to the medieval German settlement of areas east of the Holy Roman Empire. This created the German diaspora from Estonia in the north to Slovenia in the south, and will be used in the 20th century as a justification by the Nazis for the territorial claims in Central and Eastern Europe. Then, around 1350, the Black Death hit Europe. This plague killed an estimated 30 to 60% of Europe's population, although it was more like 20% in Germany. This was one of the most devastating pandemics in world history. Also in the Middle Ages, the Hanseatic League was established in the northern German city of Lübeck. The Hanseatic League was a business alliance of trading cities, which dominated trade in the Baltic for a full century and had its own legal system spanning from London in England to Novgorod in Russia. Something which happened during about the same time as the Hanseatic League's most successful years was the Western Schism, where the Catholic Church split temporarily in 2 and then later 3 parts because of multiple people claiming the title of Pope at the same time. In the century after this, the German Habsburg family would also see their rise to power. They already controlled most of the southeast of the Holy Roman Empire, namely the German Austria and Sudetenland, but also the Slavic Bohemia, Moravia and Slovenia. But there would also almost constantly be a Habsburg on the throne of the Holy Roman Empire from 1438 up until 1806. In 1517, Martin Luther published his 95 Theses, in which he exposed corruption in the Catholic Church. This sparked the Reformation and the Protestant Church splitting from the Catholic Church, although Luther never intended to make the church split. He simply wanted reforms. Luther also translated the Bible to German so regular people would be able to read it, all while being officially outlawed at the Diet of Worms. Also in 1524, the German Peasants' War broke out, which was partly sparked by the Reformation. At least 100,000 rebelling peasants were slaughtered by the elite. Then in 1608 the Protestant Union was formed, and 1 year later the Catholic League was also created. These two would eventually fall into civil war, which would later grow to be the 30 Years' War after further escalation. This is a complicated war, and I would suggest you watch a video specifically focused on this one topic. But all you need to know is that it originally started as a religious civil war inside the Holy Roman Empire, but quickly escalated into becoming a continent-wide and more political than religious war. During this war, the population of the Holy Roman Empire dropped from 16 to 10 million people, with most casualties being in the German and Bohemian lands of the empire. It would take many years for the German people to recover. After the 30 Years' War, and also before that, the German nation had become a center of culture and science. The translation of the Bible by Luther had helped the standardization of the German language greatly, and astronomers Copernicus and Kepler became some of the most influential figures during the scientific revolution that existed in Europe during the 17th century. Then, during the 18th century, the Enlightenment started to spread around Europe, and Germany was far from unaffected by this. German writers like Christian Wolff put German on the map as the philosophic language of the modern era. Prussia became increasingly politically enlightened, and the German nation produced composers like Bach, Haydn, Mozart and Beethoven. I know Mozart is Austrian, but during the 18th century Austria was still seen as undisputably German. During this time the German nation was still split up into multiple parts, and Austria would only become the only one to not become part of Germany after German unification, and would only really become seen as its own nation after the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Then, west of Germany, the French Revolution happened, which would eventually lead to the rise of Napoleon, who quickly tried to conquer Europe and originally succeeded in doing so, until the famous field invasion of Russia in the winter of 1812, which led to his first defeat. His second defeat being at Waterloo, after famously escaping the island of Elba and having a second go at conquering Europe. After the Congress of Vienna, the Holy Roman Empire was disbanded, and the internal borders were greatly simplified. All German-speaking parts of the former empire were made part of the German Confederation, which didn't always exactly match up with country borders. For example, Prussia and Austria were both not fully inside the German Confederation, and the Confederation also owned the Limburg and Luxembourg parts of the Netherlands. During the 19th century, the population of Germany increased greatly, from 21 million to 34 million in only 50 years. This coincided with the rapid industrialization in most German states, but mostly in Prussia and its sphere of influence. This rapid industrialization would greatly help the process of unification into one German state, which would later happen. If you're interested as to why it was Prussia that unified Germany and not Austria, I would recommend this video by Brain for Breakfast. Then, a national uprising in 1848, and even more of a rise in nationalism in the 2 decades following, would lead to the formation of a federal state called the North German Confederation, under the leadership of Prussia. This federal state was a result of Prussia winning the Austro-Prussian War, where the Austrians, along with their mostly South German allies, fought against the Prussians, along with their mostly North German allies. Then, a couple of years later, the North German Confederation went to war with France. On the side of the North German Confederation also fought the last 3 of the 4 last remaining independent German states, Baden, Bavaria and Württemberg. This war put all Germans except for Austria against a common enemy, which would lead to the formation of the German Reich on the 18th of January in 1871 in the recently conquered Palace of Versailles in France. After signing the peace deal with the French, they also annexed Alsace-Lotharingen. Germany then industrialized even faster. They became the leader in steel production, and the rural area became very urbanized very quickly. They also had a naval race with Britain over who will be the world leader on the sea. They also acquired some colonies and hosted the Berlin Conference, which started the scramble for Africa. Then World War I happened. They had allied themselves with Austria-Hungary some years earlier and joined the war on their side after Austria-Hungary kinda started it. The invasion of France didn't go as smoothly as the 4 decades prior though. The German troops were halted by the French divisions and Belgian resistance, quickly leading the war into a bloody trench warfare. At the same time, the Eastern Front was much more successful. This big loss on the Russian side partly led to the Russian Revolution, which resulted in the Bolsheviks taking power in Russia and them signing a peace deal with the Germans. This made it possible for the Germans to focus all their attention on the Western Front. But because of logistic problems and a sudden reinforcement because of the United States joining the war, the Germans still lost and the Treaty of Versailles was written. This treaty was horrendous for Germany. They had to give up much of their territory to France, Belgium, Denmark, Lithuania and Poland, and also pay huge sums of money to the Allies, most notably the French. They also had huge restrictions on how big the army was allowed to be. Germany became a republic and was absolutely devastated by the peace terms dictated to them by the French. This, combined with hyperinflation and a great economic depression, was a perfect recipe for political unrest, something both the communists and fascists really wanted to use to get to power. Turns out, the fascists managed to win just slightly more souls. We all know what happened during World War II. After 12 years of Nazi rule and millions of deaths all around the globe because of war and genocide, Germany was absolutely devastated for the second time. Its beautiful cities in ruin, its population greatly reduced, and no one having any idea what the future would hold. Some people wanted to remove the German nation from the face of the earth completely in a Holocaust-like way. Others wanted it to be partitioned into many small parts again, so it could never become as powerful again. In reality, it did partition, just not into many parts. Only 4, actually. A Soviet, American, British, and French sphere of influence, which would later become the German Democratic Republic and the Federal Republic of Germany, also known as East and West Germany. While East Germany went from being a fascist dictatorship to becoming a communist dictatorship, West Germany enjoyed great growth and growing freedom in the years from 1945 onwards. The economy started booming and Germany became one of the most prosperous nations in the world. This is known as the Wirtschaftswunder, or in English, economic miracle. Skipping over some Cold War history, Germany became unified again in 1990, coinciding with the end of communism and the Cold War. Then, in 2005, Merkel became the Chancellor of Germany and has been in that position ever since. She is now often seen as the de facto leader of the European Union and is often credited with all the blame caused by the disaster that is the European migrant crisis. Germany is now in an important moment in its history. More people are standing up for the national identity and turning against Merkel and the mass immigration that has made Germans minorities in their major cities. A counter-movement is on the rise and Merkel is seeing record low approval ratings. This is especially important because Germany is at the heart of the European project, and if a Eurosceptic party rises to power in Germany, the entire project is at risk, which is either a fantastic or a terrible thing depending on your views on the EU. Only the future will tell what is about to happen to Germany and whether they want to keep their national identity or continue to become an increasingly multicultural country without an identity of its own.
Also, I would like to put the link down below regarding the video clip. Next, do you know who is the father of German literature? So if you don't know, the father of German literature is Martin Opitz. Martin Opitz, 1597 up to 1639. Opitz has often been termed the father of German literature because of his pivotal role. Through his poetological reforms and exemplary poetry and translations, in encouraging a revolution of the German vernacular as a literary language that was at least the equal of Latin. Opitz was born in Lower Silesia to a wealthy family in 1618. He enrolled at the University of Frankfurt under order, the study of literary humaniores in 1619. He went to Heidelberg and in 1620, he visited Leiden, where he came into the contact with Daniel Hensius 1580 up to 1655. Some of whose poetry he had already translated into German Alexandrines. He also traveled for a time in Transylvania. So there you go, guys. This is my topic, the German literature. Yes, this is Billy J. Alanano, a fourth-year student of Santa Cecilia College, major in English. So thank you guys for watching. Bye!